Hi, we have three panelists today. We have with us Unnati and Dr. Venkat and Akash, all of whom are open source AI enthusiasts. We've also got Bharat here. And so we're all sort of trying to get a sense of what the open source AI community thinks should be done, should discussions be around, and various gaps in the community itself, also in terms of support and sustainability for such projects. To just start off this conversation, if we could maybe talk a bit more about exciting use cases that each of you see in the community, and perhaps also challenges that these use cases are facing in terms of scaling and sustainability of such use cases. Perhaps we'll start with Unnati and then we'll go to Akash.
In terms of use cases, I mean, I feel like AI and open source just presents an infinite amount of stuff, right? We all have things that I mean, I think the starting point of any AI for that matter is things or automating tasks that we don't like. I know we talk a lot about like AI being used for creative stuff, but these are things personally that I don't like. One of the first few things that we do want to try and figure out is tasks that nobody likes, like robotic process automation and a lot of these things, which can be done at scale. Um, Problem with something that I see today with AI and its open source is that a lot of good performing models or a lot of models which can be reasonably be used by people with a lower learning curve are actually pretty closed or are paid, right? Like Claude or OpenAI. And those are the first things, like even when we're making frameworks on top of things to use, the first thing that we optimize for is the closed source API rather than the open source, models and how they like we optimize for those sort of that's my
Adding on top of what Unnati said, in an Indian context, what you've seen is that people think, okay, if something is supposed to be deployed in India, it has to be in X, Y, or Z regional language. But the reality of it is, all of the data sets which are primarily there, they're all too pure, like in the sense that it's either Hindi, so the entire transcript or the text corpus is going to be in Hindi. If it is for, let's say, Bengali or for Tamil or for Malayalam as such, it is expected that, okay, if you're doing for a certain language, you get the corpus in that language, but real world is not that pure. Real world is extremely noisy. And the more you actually try to put these systems into production, different issues crop up, which you might think, okay, it's not at all like related to the actual AI product per se, but if you think about it a bit deeper, it's more of the absence of proper data, which mimics the real world. So I work at ITIL, and one of the things that I can like, even if you wake me up at night and ask me what's the biggest problem that ITIL has, it is the fact that a lot of like the product use cases, they expect everything to be in a certain language, but that is not the reality. You will have people speaking in Hindi, they might go back to some English product names or features or any issue as such, and then you again expect that, okay, your data set or whatever model you're trying to use, will that cater to it or not? And if it does not, then you go back to your business teams, you tell them, okay, give us the rules in all of these languages, the regional languages that are there. And if you look at it for India, even though we may have like 22 or 23 scheduled languages, it's usually the 13 or 11 top ones which cover a lot of the bulk of the population. And even for them, a lot of the speech recognition models don't pan out well. Many LLMs stop at, let's say, the top 4 or 5 languages at max, if at all they support them. And one of the ways that this could really improve is with having volunteers or even just paying people as well to collect this sort of data at scale. And then seeing, okay, is your use case now being solved? Are your models now able to account for the fact that people might speak in any of these languages? And if at all your application or let's say the business teams are aligned for paying as well, because in many organizations, paying for data itself seems like a big onslaught that, okay, will I get the budgets to do this at all or not? And again, it's on the teams to figure this out, have regional language experts, because companies again will not want to spend much money on getting such people. And what we do, at least, is we buy such data. So there are companies which are out there which provide you a lot of these golden, you could say, data. But it's again on you as a user to ensure that all of these, let's say, data points that you collect, whether it's for speech or text, it is representative of what the reality is. Reality is always mixed. It is never pure. And I hope, like, as and when these LLMs come in, they help us accelerate that. I'm not saying it will take away the task of doing this for XYZ languages, but at least lessen the burden on your team per se to roll out such products as such. So yeah.
I've occupied a bunch of channels, so you want to...
No, it's okay. If you want to speak on some of
So
the
is there
gaps and
a
challenges.
particular aspect that you would like me to comment on?
If you have anything to add on to what Unnati and Akash said.
So I will just add one point, which is just a riff off the data set, right? AI is serious business, and the number of applications is not the problem. The problem is that if the larger Indian tech community has to master it, it has to get its hands dirty and do the hard work. There is no excuse. You figure out the LLM ops, figure out the distributed training business, to figure out the data sets. I don't get the sense of commitment yet, or first of all, an appreciation of how big a story this is in our lifetime. And second, the drive to get your arms around all of this. Today morning, I had a call with somebody from the Valley who's asking me for, okay, if I have to embed, create embeddings for SQL expressions, I could think of only 2 people who could like reason about this. Ideally, we should have like hundreds of folks here, and that won't happen until the community gets serious about all of this. I mean, I mean the entire like 500,000 people who are sitting here, Gurgaon, Hyderabad, and other places.
Thank you. So like I mentioned earlier, we would like this to be a more interactive, engaging session. So if anyone in the audience has anything to add to gaps and challenges in the open source AI community in India, please, you can feel free to add on to this. Otherwise, we can move on to the next topic. Right. Okay. So now we've sort of covered broadly. Yeah.
Sorry. The point what you have mentioned, that people are not ready to kind of make their own hands dirty, right? So there are 2 reasons which I can think of, or there is just too much of information explored right now, right? That there is no right way to kind of do things, right? Like you learn something and something else comes, right? And then as a teacher, I teach a lot of people, and then what I see that, okay, unless you give them that, okay, this has to be done this way, there are very less people who would kind of go and make their own hands dirty on their own. What they're looking is that, okay, can you give me the steps which I can follow and get the things done? They'll do it, but it requires some efforts, and then that's a challenge which I see that, right? Why not people are doing it? Because things are changing very fast, and then I see there's a fatigue of learning people are having now. Say that I learned these things and now this is all obsolete. This is obsolete. Now what should I do? Better to wait for some time and then come back to it, something like that. So that is something which I see as a perspective in the general, because at least in the mid career level people are there. Said I have burned my hands multiple times. I'm not jumping it right now. And now even the companies are not willing to pay for your learnings. They said, okay, you figure it out on your own and then come back to me if you do something. So there's a challenge which is there, which I see that, okay, I mean, to answer your question, I mean, just kind of adding a point, not answer, just adding a point to you, right? That why do you see so many people? That's one of the reasons there, I believe. Yeah.
My question is, what would incentivize open source AI development when, I mean, the most natural path seems to be to profit off of it. And this is why would people, put out models for free and allow other people to use them when they could just as well make them a service and profit off of them? And I mean, I know this has no easy answer, but And I also have a second question. Do you see a problem with companies such as Meta sort of monopolizing the, I mean, not monopolizing, but rather being involved with, sort of spearheading open source AI? At least, I mean, I can only think of Meta. I'm sure there are a lot more. I just don't have my ear to the ground. But sort of having the say in what these models can be used for, who can use them.
I think there are two parts. So the first one, the incentive primarily. So if you look at a lot of these government contracts, right? So I remember back in like around 2012 or 2013, the government of Gujarat, they put out a tender for public Wi-Fi, and one of the clauses there was to have entirely the entire stack to be open source, everything from the gateway to managing that infra, so that if let's say one vendor comes in and goes out, you have the entire stack which can be managed by somebody else. The same thing has to be done not just for AI specific projects. I would say for any software being built out for public or public use in general. So everything from let's say your toll infra, FASTag, UPI to an extent is you could say they have their repos as well. And any company trying to get government contracts, that should be something which is very stringently enforced. And one of the, you could say, responses is that the bigger companies won't apply for such tenders. That is what is the incentive. Smaller companies for regional folks or regional like locations, they can bring up offerings, and because of all of them being open source, you can have standardized tests or you could say evaluation or whatever software it is. And it again helps with the security aspect as well. So you're not tied down to one single vendor, and you also get the benefit of everything being out in the open. So no company can get away with anything with bad practices as such, and you kind of avoid situations like how CrowdStrike like kind of nuked the entire world. You can imagine that, right? Like somebody somewhere like nuked the entire world's travel infra basically, and that was one of the side effects. But you can imagine it can have even wider effects as well. And having those sort of things, obviously, which machines have CrowdStrike? Not your personal ones. It's all like enterprise machines which have that. And if those get impacted so easily, you want your governments to push for everything to be open as much as possible. And that is one way I feel like adding competition is the way to incentivize it. That not just the bigger companies, let's say the top body shops or like outsourcing companies might do it. It's also the smaller companies that can try to go in if that sort of a legal framework is there, that okay, for public goods, public code has to be there, not just for AI, but for the entire thing. And as far as Meta trying to, let's say, change their image per se, I mean, it's a company, they will do whatever they want to do with their data. And the problem there is, again, with people not being told, like, what might happen to the data. So in hindsight now, if they say that, okay, you agree to all of your historical data being used to train or improve their models, that's on us because we didn't pay for the platform, so we don't have a choice in saying whether or not we accept that. But again, Meta is not just one. There are other companies as well, Mistral and all of these people. So they're all using public data from the internet. We don't have a say in whether we get royalties for X amount of inference, but we should have a certain, let's say, scope or filter when we look at their product. So if, let's say, you want to, so one of the examples is, if you try to use Meta's models or even ChatGPT, and if you have them look at a customer's email, which is like fully laden with expletives, these models will refuse to do anything if you're just using, let's say, an API-based LLM. But if you have control over a model, if you have fine-tuned it to an extent, or even if you use like a little bit more liberal models like Mistral. So I don't know if it's a European impact on Mistral, but those models don't shy away from answering questions or dealing with the tougher situations, which in an enterprise setting or even, let's say, your own like typical use cases, you might stumble onto. But you don't want a use case to like literally like pull the handbrake on an application, right? So that sort of a check on terms of, let's say, can that model critique Meta or whoever is the maker? So those sort of questions should be asked, and you should have like these LMSS leaderboards for the same thing. We don't have that, I guess, but if we have that, you kind of go in to applications with a lot more confidence. Okay, this manufacturer or a provider of an LLM has XYZ alignment, you could say, done to their model. And for a use case or even for a country, like you could have some biased opinion about a certain country, and your model might not want to pick a certain country out of, let's say, given set of options. So all of these things need to be, let's say, standardized, and people need to come up with more tests or like data sets which test on these set of attributes. So that is one way I could say, like, not to like fixate on one provider of an LLM, but rather the entire community, but against a standard as such.
Yeah. You were asking about why open source, what's the incentive? If you look at PyTorch or deep learning today, would not have been possible if PyTorch wasn't open source, right? And that's the theory of open source. Like we have had, if you look at PyTorch versus TensorFlow, it said that TensorFlow was, and there are like case studies and stuff done on it by, open source maintainers before me. I mean, we've talked a lot about CrowdStrike and the problem with open source, but I think let's talk about it. Would CrowdStrike not have happened if all of the repo searches were closed source? And the answer is that it's more likely to happen there. In fact, there are certain people, certain organizations that push for, especially medical devices, the ones that you talk about. For example, the heart pacemaker. The software used there today, it's a very brilliant talk, and I don't remember the name of the person who did it, but the closed source softwares, because they're closed source, they're more likely to have glitches because they have a smaller people watching over them. The answer of like just having open source, that somebody would notice something which is, which was not caught on, or it could prevent, in the future, that this would not be repeated. Over time, correction of mistakes or rather the mistakes themselves, if done in open source, would have like a higher chance of being caught. That would be, and that essentially is actually very profitable for companies building on top of it. Second question around meta monopolizing. I think that is already something that we're struggling with, right? Like it's not something that we do not know that we're not struggling with. I actually think that data protections are like, even with data protections or like the companies are getting away with like a lot of things which is not by law permissible or even by consensus, but they're getting away with it because they're monopoly at this particular point. That there is that skew that the market is just 4 or 5 companies which can actually have the compute or the resources and they are using it to sort of also kill out their competitions, right? Like that is a very real problem, and that is how the governments are trying to see how we can tackle it. It's not an answer, like it's not a solved problem for sure, but yeah, that is something that we're looking at. Is how do we sort of, when you talk about something as simple as OpenAI was supposed to be a non-profit, which was supposed to benefit humanity. When it turned out, when the incentives, and today I think we can talk about like OpenAI being used. Yes, they have certain models free, but why is it that it's being used when given the tax benefits and all of that as a non-profit? How are they now allowed to sell to the enterprises and make money off it? And that's a question, like how do we sort of put a stop to that? Because it is, and it is trained on public data as well, right? Like it is trained on data. By crawling, not just the private data that they have. They are crawling the internet. They are using data which they were not authorized to. All of these were gray areas. So if you're using a lot of public goods, how come and that's a question that the governments as well as public is asking, how do we not have the right to use the technology that comes out of it? But yeah.
I have several thoughts. I'll just talk about one thing, which has to do with how do we create the incentive? How do we fund something like this? So there was a conversation that happened like a few days back, and my point was that let's take the Indian fintech industry. All of the folks who are involved in, whether it is in Amex or whether it is in PhonePe and so on. Now this is now such an infrastructural component that it will go into pretty much every application everywhere. So it is in the interest of the PhonePes of like India to build up a sizable number of folks who understand the entire LLM stack, all the way from hardware to the applications, languages, and so on, because that has a direct implication on the on their business. Somebody has to pay. Whether there are only two big players, I don't believe in the non-profits funding all of this stuff. That's too small, too insignificant. The muzzle is really there in two places, in the government and in the private industry. The government can do things where the market fails, but the market has an incentive to build this out. So the point I was trying to make is that it is in the interest of the PhonePays of the world, the Flipkarts of the world, who have the resources and the technical capacity to fund the community level upskilling, if you will. If they don't do that, there will be a AI tax. Every time you send a token to OpenAI, you are going to pay a percentage of your transaction, right? For me, if you have a asset like the Indian market and you want to build the finternet and all of these kinds of things, you will have to invest. To me, it's very obvious from a strategic standpoint. This is where I think a lot of things are boiled down, in my opinion, to leadership and the vision across various institutions. It was great to hear Nandan at the recent Carnegie event, technology event. But there's only one Nandan, right? When Sarvam had to raise money, they went to the valley. The Indian elite did not, the Indian financial elite or other elite did not fund them, right? To the same extent. So my suggestion is that this needs to be done at a community level, because this needs scaled resources. It is not going to happen. So even if my worry is that there will be like the Indic agents, the one that I was proposing, that needs a community of people to develop it, adopt it. The application scale is there. The economics is there. In fact, when I did the modeling for Sarvam, saying that how, if Indic agents have to be deployed, can we deploy it at scale? And I was shocked by the amount of compute that is required. It is trivial, right, for the applications that we can build. So that the hardware is not the limitation today. The cost is not the limitation. The willingness, the ability of the community to come together and put together applications is the limitation. And that requires vision and a concerted effort. What Nitin Kamath and so on is doing is good, but he's seen as an outlier. That is my point. He should be like, that should be a cross-cutting activity.
I'd like to maybe probe a bit and go a little tangential to the planned agenda. So you mentioned, open source projects by the government or, DPIs and such things. And so when we're talking about monopolies and monopolies over data especially, a lot of the digital public infrastructure that exists or is being developed aren't fully open source, and they're still quite opaque, especially the ones that use, say, biometric technologies and such other tech. So then what do you think would be, there are obviously a lot of risks around open washing and generally also just misinforming the public. And so if you could maybe talk a bit more about the threats of open washing and perhaps how that ties in with sustainability of open source projects by the community.
By open washing, you're referring to the fact that you obtain data from a certain source.
So as claiming that a lot of this digital public infrastructure is fully open source when in fact only parts of it are open source and aren't fully transparent. Yeah.
You mean from a licensing point of view that it seems open, but it's not?
Yeah,
open.
yeah.
I thought you meant data laundering, you gather data from sources which have not signed off on it, and then say that, okay, I got it from somebody who has agreed to that. Which is true in OpenAI's context, you could say, but your point is different, right?
Yeah.
So that point, I would say, makes sense, but again, the problem is our legislature, as well as the people in a lot of ministries, they're not that tech savvy to begin with. So when, let's say, somebody in their, I don't even think team, but let's say somebody in their vendors circle suggests such a thing, that let's just use the public to justify or let's say vet our software, they will worry thinking that, oh, if we give it out, somebody might use it and do whatever. So that sort of fear is, I would say, very not grounded in reality at all. and a lot of recent examples with a lot of companies getting security lapses, including Microsoft, including Meta at some point. So those are examples which say that security is not a finished thing. It's a continuous process, and as long as people, or at least governments, agree to that fact and decide that we have to take a very fundamental approach to everything. So you might very frequently see a lot of government websites, not the bigger ministries, smaller ones. They'll have a Gmail address written there, and that, instead of an NIC email address, that itself is a huge, extremely huge flag. And because of that sort of carelessness, you could say there is no watchdog apart from CERT who might tell, okay, stop doing this or update your phones or something like that. But what the government can in fact do is, let's say, tap into colleges, tap into smaller communities, for them to be the spearhead of leading the charge in terms of, okay, we are looking at X ministry, we are looking at X department's code and all that. So that way you automatically upskill them in terms of real world. And with India, the benefit is of the 1.x billion population. So scale is here. We already have that. It's just that it has to be concerted, and Venkat said, it has to be directed. That I hope the future generations and our current generation try to push for that as much, and make an example of it. So I think recently the UK government does a lot of open source stuff, and they publish all of it as well. And the rationale behind doing certain things a certain manner. If in today's date you look at, let's say, the passport website, it asks you for an image in a certain resolution, PDFs under an MB or something. These are, let's say, 10-year-old, you could say, data points. Today, everything is higher resolution, everything, you have better networks as well, but such infra, or at least the supplementary things to infra, is kind of still a decade or a generation behind. And that sort of ramp or overhaul has to happen. And I feel like if people make noise about it, it's only then going to get highlighted, otherwise it won't. And thankfully, the income tax website kind of got an overall, and other government departments are slowly getting that, but it's a, you could say, slow pace, but it can help with a lot of attention to certain things. So it should not be that attention has to be the driving force behind change. It should be something which is always constant. So that's kind of my take.
I might, I'm going to add to that. Actually, I think, so I work with open science, on open science using AI. And I actually work with different government agencies around the world, like Alan Turing in UK and NASA, and like my current client, NASA and America. One of the key differences that I see is that, and I think that's my takeaway from it, it may not be true. I think the difference between Indian structures versus outside is, just, can you give me a second? I'm sorry, my microphone is glitching. Let me come back to it later. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry, it was getting stuck, so I wasn't sure if it was my stuck point. Anyway, so the key difference that I see is that we have very defined paths in getting into government organizations, right? Like the first things that any of the things that research officers, get a master's or get a PhD. How do you get a PhD in a field that did not exist a few years ago? And the pace of it is just absolutely bonkers, right? You have older people who have certain amount of credentials who are there, not to say that they're not valuable, but it's everybody is looking exactly the same in terms of the credit, and we have very defined paths. Even if you want to be, say, you want to head an AI operation, you have to be an IAS officer, and that itself is such a high bar, because I may not want to be in civil servant, and there are different types of background and different educational platforms today as compared to 10 years ago. I think especially in computer science, in fact, traditional education systems, for example, did not serve me just because I did not fit in well with them. Not to say that there aren't good people coming out of it, but there are other pathways people have done and gotten it, and gotten mentorships and gotten sort of other communities, which have been transformational in terms of skills, right? Like if you want those skills and if you want diverse opinions, you have to have people from diverse backgrounds. But if our very filtering is around the backgrounds that we look at in terms of like meritocracy, how do we get like voices that can point out, hey, you should not be using Gmail because they are not allowed in the first place, right? Like because if you look at a journalist coming and saying that we should probably not have surveillance because of these things that that pose us risk, even though the positives do not outweigh the negatives outweigh the positives right now. And those are questions that need to be asked, but we do not have people who are competent enough to ask those questions inside the government. And you have basically, the same voices in which are probably translating into, the reason why we have such a broken infrastructure in a lot of these cases. And that is something that has been done well, I think. And to be fair, like other government organizations have not done it that well as well, but they're changing it, right? NASA has TOPS, which is Transform to Open Science ideology, and they're massively funding, different people and different backgrounds and different things and training coming out of it. Similar programs are done by Alan Turing, which has like, side, study groups, which do not require you to have certain credentials to get in. And those spaces are important because a lot of people, especially when you come at, from a diversity background, like even as soon as you come from diverse voices, diverse life paths, these are things that matter. I can be 35 and get into government at a certain position. That should be allowed. I don't see why we should have similar, we shouldn't be questioning these things right now. And I think that would be, yeah.
I have some thoughts. I had, interestingly, a ringside view to Aadhaar when it was being built in 2010, right? And later glimpses into UPI and later. So there is a judgment involved when you talked about open washing and you were hinting at Aadhaar itself. I can tell you that it was a straightforward system design challenges, but the single biggest issue that they had was there just aren't enough competent people who can build systems of the scale of India. So they had to like do a lot of compromises because pretty much, because how many biometric companies are there who can actually build, who have the depth to, when they had to go out and find biometric providers, everybody is linked to some spy agency for all practical purposes. Now, how do you build a national utility with a foreign company's spy software right in the middle of your institution? They are dealing with, because I had extensive conversations with Pramod and some of the key folks who are involved. My suggestion to the open source community is not be judgmental, but if there was deep capacity in the community to actually deliver these projects, I don't think that would have been an issue. And what is considered open source is also a questionable. Try going after Google and see your Android app going out of the market just like that. So monopolies are monopolies, right? That's the way they behave. So my big thing is that my big desire is to see a 10x to 100x of rootconf, not that once the institutional capacity exists to build and sort out some of these problems, it will happen. But for that, the community has to take excellence seriously. You really deeply have to understand systems engineering. You have to build complicated systems, spend the nights, debug them, to deeply understand what it means to build all of these things. There is no easy way. So when the gentleman was telling me that they don't want to upskill themselves, that was like, first of all, they have no future, in my opinion. We are already, that train has already left the station. More importantly, it is about attitude. What kind of people are we training, right? This is this thing is, if you look at Kubernetes, 140,000 people, like 1,000 people contributing to the Kubernetes repository, continuously, that will move at that pace, and it should move at that pace. It's a common infrastructure. You better pull up your socks and get ready and engage with those kinds of things. So my ask of the community and of the curators like you, and also I'm having the simultaneously ask to the leadership of the different companies that are recruiting all of these things, that pull up your socks. This is an open world. If you don't build the local language models, you are talking about Sarvam having like 1 million data points and so on. You have no bloody idea how much data Facebook has. Facebook has 30 times the data of Google, and it is in all languages from every nook and corner of this country, right? So get serious about building an app that can go into rural areas that will work without connectivity. Facebook did that, right? Because they have like massive resources and all of those kinds of things. So it comes down to, in my opinion, root conf like organizations and open source communities getting really serious and taking the challenges of the community. And so the earlier the demo was interesting. Rust, the consensus protocol, right? You have to do this. You have to burn your time and understand the consensus protocol. Then you know how the coordination is happening within Kubernetes.
I'd like to delve a bit deeper into what Unnati mentioned on diversity and inclusivity. I mean, even looking at this room, generally this conference, any tech conference, there's always a massive, massive gender divide, and it's quite. Given that we're now already in 2024 and we've had a bunch of years. What are your thoughts on the open source AI community, especially including more people from diverse backgrounds, whether that's gender, whether that's class, caste, ethnic backgrounds? So what would you suggest communities like this to, promote more work being done by diverse communities?
If you're asking for my experience, and I mean in the most nicest way, I think I'm exhausted with the conversation in our country specifically, right? It's not something that I've worked with, and I've worked with different companies from different countries. So I've experienced, and I've been part of communities from different countries as well, right? And so I think the difference is very starking. I'm not going to say that like the Western countries do not struggle with the same. They do, right? But I think in India, we're particularly like my experience, and this is my personal experience. Anytime I've tried to bring up this question and tried to bring up, how to do this well, I've met with a lot of hostility. And it's very exhausting. It's exhausting to sort of continuously, and that exhaustion, I think, is at least acknowledged when I'm going into the other countries, right? Like, as simple as just that acknowledgement is not there. That, hey, it must be exhausting to be the only woman in the room. Even with, a bunch of people who are very well-meaning to do. It's very exhausting to be the only person who's the representation because of the way that we've sort of, the way that the world sort of plays. And the conversation itself is met with like a lot of flack. I have not had a safe space to sort of say that, hey, this is what you're doing and this is hazardous. It looks like that this is not hazardous, but it is, because it translates into so and so, right? Like anytime you're like, oh, I want only people from IITs. IITs, like the implication of that is that, hey, you're going to institutes which have 80-90% of men, and it's not like I do not think women are not good enough to get into the top institutes, but there are very practical reasons. One, we are sort of constrained by the practicality. For example, I'm from privilege, right? Like I'm from a lot of privilege. I have parents who are like sort of, very economically, are always backing me. They're not sort of stopping me in a lot of these cases. But the reality is that women tend to take into account how far are they from their cities, in terms of, how safe are the cities. I'm not going to be able to, my parents are going to think 10 times before sending me to say IIT Roorkee versus, in a major city, simply because of the safeguards. And I cannot go out, and those are always things like taking into account that I cannot attend a 9 p.m. Talk after a certain point, because I have to think about the logistics of getting back home. And all of these things are just not taken into account. So when we start talking about diversities, yes, but you have to take the practicality into account, that you probably have to fund it more. You have to look at how you have to probably, like, get more voices. The other thing about open source, women tend to have, and this is a study that is done, like the lack of representation is attributed to the fact that you do tend to have, it's a lot of free work, and women already tend to have a lot more on their plates in around the world as compared to, otherwise. So if you're going to be like, hey, do this free thing so that you can get this particular thing, it's just practically not possible, because you have 10 other things that you have to think about. And those are things, how how many people can get away with, like, becoming, first of all, financially stable, then having, every parts of life where done. I think policies need to come into account, but the conversation where it is disruption of things like, very practically, like the amount of backlash, for example, period leave received, and it's just insane. Why would you not have, why would you not take into account, like, that there are struggles that, women tend to deal with, or sort of have safe spaces. The other thing is also about, how do we have conversations where we have to change our language on how we talk about certain things. And that itself becomes problematic when you try to point out, hey, that you're being overly sensitive. No, I'm not being overly sensitive. It is problematic when you say certain things in a certain way, because it tends to sort of, it tends to hit certain people in a certain different way in a lot of these settings. And that does require a lot of work. And weirdly enough, the work is put on the women. I see leadership courses for women. I'm like, it's like saying that you do not have a problem with sexism. I lack the skills in me, and that goalpost just keeps shifting. It's a lot of bullshit. You're like, oh, women need to pay $2,000 to run a women leadership course so that you can become a leader. But then why am I paying for you being sexist? It's not recognizing that the system that is sort of selecting their leaders itself is sexist, right? Itself is sort of, and the way that we're evaluating candidates are problematic. That's my long rant on it. But yeah, that's
Yeah, I think, I'll thank you so much for that. That was really helpful in terms of also moving the conversation over to the men in the room. And how do you suggest that men in, not just men, anyone from privileged background, create a more safe space for women and people from other diverse communities to participate in developing open source AI, participate in conferences such as this? What do you think men's role should be in creating those sort of spaces?
I can take it. Not that we have a formal policy at our organization, but there are some things that we think is the right thing to do from an economic standpoint as well as otherwise. So one of the things I go around telling people is that, especially for women engineers, that you should come work for me, because come work in our organization, because it is not toxic. We actually like women and diversity in the organization. I mean, I see it purely as a, like, on the hiring marketplace, like, it's actually quite a bit of competitive advantage, saying that we are not, we will treat you well. It's such a basic thing. But this is the key point, which is that I know for a fact that now, I mean, because I have been in a vendor-like situation, I've got a peek into many organizations. I can tell you that most workplaces are toxic. Toxic even for men, for that matter, right? I do not recommend, like, you list me the unicorns, and I can tell you that only a small fraction deserve the folks. The problem is that they pay well and so on. I think that partly the responsibility lies in folks like me, who are in a position of power within the organization, to set the standards for all of this. And we, as a small company, I can get away, right? But I think it will start by acknowledging what Unnati said, first thing, that there is a problem, and said, unsaid, and so on. We ourselves don't want to be mean for the sake of being mean, but I personally think, I mean, at least 2 of my mentors have been women, and I have enjoyed that. I just think that they can be great engineers, like because their thought process is different from the rest of the folks, like a lot of the men. I want that in my organization. And I think my pitch to leadership would be clean up your organization, make it more acceptable, and women have real challenges. I have a family, I know what they are. I think we can make it work. I don't, this is all, we are smart enough to figure it out. A lot of it has to, boils down to intent and prioritization. I'm not a big believer in DEI for its own sake, but I believe in just being decent as an individual. And I want women engineers because I really think they are smart, right? But there are, the problems are very real. So I asked I have a product manager who is like a woman, and I said, oh, like, why don't you travel to the north? Like, you are away from your family, living as a single person. I'm happy to like help you relocate to wherever like north that you want to go, and you can live closer to the family, because we are all remote, not a problem. She absolutely drew the line and said, I am not going, never to north. And she said, everybody is like judging me, like here I can be like an anonymous person. I have the privilege of not being judged. And she completely refused that. And I still remember, this happened about a couple of years back. I still remember that conversation, the degree of resistance that she had. And I don't see how tech will develop in the north, right, with having these kinds of closed judgmental systems. So my thing as a leader to other folks is that encourage good people to join. Like, you have, this tremendous amount of talent. I mean, the one challenge that I have is that they think that at least the conditioning is that they're all going towards what could be thought of as soft jobs, right? Involving people, communication, and all of those kinds of things. Whereas I think a lot of the problems that we deal with are real hard problems. They require like the intellectual firepower of like everybody at the table. So I would want to encourage them to take on like really hard problems. Right?
I think adding on to all of these points before, so I can look at this from two point of views. Like, one is from my current org. So thanks to COVID, you could say companies have opened up remote work like massively. Previously, it was, you could say, only MNCs which had like, let's say, 2 days a month that you can do work from home. But now it's a norm, like you either have it or you don't, or some form in the middle. And what that has enabled, at least Airtel, to do is to get a lot of their own employees who quit to come back. And they would all jump, like the moment they are offered a role, they would immediately say yes. Because that's what remote working kind of has enabled. And it goes a long way in terms of career growth as well as avoiding stagnation as well. And the other point of view I wanted to highlight was the issue that Unnati said, like about control or time or infra to support the same. So when I think about open source, I think about free time basically. Like, I might have a day job, but I would want to work, or let's say work on some issue in some other project or my own project for that matter. And that only comes if I have free time. And free time is again something which you, as an individual, if you have a job, then whatever time is there after your 9 to 5 or whatever is that time. And having that freedom of, okay, having a job, deciding what time you work on your own things, other responsibilities in life, and all of that. So it's a very, you could say, fundamental problem. Like, I think back to my college days, and the biggest concern there is students not being treated as adults despite being 18 plus. The principal thinks of themselves as your guardian or some sorts. And to an extent, if you look at what IITs do, they don't have attendance bits, they don't have attendance. And all of your tier 2, tier 3 colleges, they bank on attendance that, okay, you should have 75%, you should have 80%, or else we are not going to let you sit in the exams, just so that their accreditation doesn't go bad or their rankings don't go down. But then I don't see the problem there. Like, the student is paying the fee. They are adults who have enrolled in a college willingly, for the most part, I would say. then they should be allowed to like take the choice of, okay, can I do more credits in a semester? Can I choose a domain of my liking? Not just engineering, I would say, any domain for that matter. So that again is boiling down to control or like freedom to do what you want to do. And if that is not there from the very beginning, it will not be there during your job or even let's say after your job as well. And that sort of a regime, I would say, is not something which will happen overnight. It takes a lot of willpower to stand up to your own family members, to your friends, to your teachers or whoever. And to do that means someone has to support you otherwise. So let's say if things don't pan out, you don't have a job or you still want to work somewhere. So you would have to have a stipend or some sort of a pay to get things going, and that is only enabled by our ecosystem, which in this case could be the government. Now I think they have this internship, some stipend that is being offered as well. So those sort of programs help, and your community at large should also have this, you could say, not a network, some sort of an infra wherein if you are doing a job, you have the freedom to work from wherever you want, and you kind of are able to rate companies for that as well. So there are a lot of companies who do this flip thing of, okay, you sign on saying they're hybrid or remote, but then you start working and then they turn the tables on you saying that, yeah, we're all coming in person, and then it's a do this or go out kind of a thing. So highlighting this to companies or having this in a publicly accessible place where, okay, this company has X notice, X policies, and those are verified to an extent. So that ensures for a very transparent workplace, which otherwise is very difficult to do.